Welcome to Kiffin's Keep, an intellectual resource for the pillar and buttress of the truth, which is the church. This is a project of the London Lyceum, which is dedicated to serious thinking for a serious church. I'm Jordan Stefaniak, host of Kiffin's Keep and president of the London Lyceum. And as always, I'm excited to be here with you guys today to chat about a fun topic. Maybe not so fun. I don't know. You decide. Before I get into the video, as a reminder, if you're watching here on YouTube right now, go ahead and click that subscribe button. Hit the like button as well. If you're listening to this on podcast, number one, thanks for listening on and being an exclusive member for us. We appreciate your support. And also a reminder, if you're not subscribed to the YouTube, go ahead and go subscribe and like the video. Anyway, let's get down to business. Oh, before I do, I forgot. I want to show you guys. I don't know if you can see it very well. I don't know how long ago it was now, depending on when you're watching it anyway. But there was this whole Anabaptist blow up thing about how Anabaptists are bad. Well, not bad, but Baptists are Anabaptists, and being an Anabaptist is obviously bad. This has nothing to do with the episode right now. I'm just telling you this story because I think the shirt's cool. And there's mugs too, and they're over in the kitchen, and I'm not going to go get them now. I think they're awesome too. You can get the mugs on our website. You can get a pint glass, all that kind of fun stuff on the website. I'll drop a link to it, so if you want them, you can go get them. So, long story short, made these jokes, and then I made a graphic because I thought it was fun, because I think clearly the Anabaptist charge is number one, false, but number two, it's not new. We've been falsely called Anabaptists for hundreds of years. And so here we are. We've got William Kiffin, who signed the First London Confession of Faith. And at the beginning of the preamble of that in 1644, when it was published, they used this phrase of commonly, though falsely, called Anabaptist. So there you have it. If you want some of the cool merch that I think is fun, go get it. It's at our website. I'll link to it. Now, I want to talk a little bit about plagiarism. And the reason I want to talk about this is because it seems that plagiarism has not been an isolated incident among Christians, particularly those who teach in various capacities. It seems to be becoming more of a pervasive and common practice that, for whatever reason, is either ignored or hidden or rationalized away as something that is not that serious. But I think plagiarism is deadly serious. It's corrosive, it's sinful, and it infects all sorts of problematic areas and moves itself around and ends up infecting all sorts of things and doing damage. So let's talk about plagiarism. I do want to stay focused on the pervasive nature of plagiarism, the nature of plagiarism itself, why plagiarism is so bad, why it seems to be happening, those sort of things. I did about 2+ years ago write an essay on the London Lyceum about plagiarism, particularly sermon plagiarism. So as a reminder, refresher course, a little over 2 years ago, Ed Litton, who was the president of the SBC at the time, was accused of plagiarizing sermons. And so I'm sure if you were up on sort of like the drama that was happening, clips were being shared of him lifting phrases, sentences. He was pulling outlines, sermon titles, and even personal illustrations and attributing them to himself, though they were J.D. Greer's. And Litton wasn't unique in this, but this was sort of like the big blow up as far as someone who's famous. And there was all sorts of like exterior, ulterior reasons that became a sort of a flashpoint. But I took that quite seriously, and so I wrote up an essay on sermon plagiarism because I don't think it can be rationalized away. And fundamentally, I think if it's a repetitive issue, then it should be a disqualifying issue as far as the office of elder goes, because elders should be above reproach. And I think sermon plagiarism is sin. I think plagiarism is sin, but I think to hitch that to a sermon is doubly bad, and it is extremely grievous. And to do that habitually, repetitively, is warranting of church discipline. Now, as I mentioned, this is becoming a pervasive trend. So I even think of the pastor that I grew up under. He is now since retired, so I don't feel bad outing him in this. But he would do the exact same thing as Lytton, but probably significantly worse. So he would pull from people like Francis Chan and Craig Groeschel and Stephen Furtick. He would pull sermon titles, sermon outlines, sermon illustrations, book paragraphs, pages, quoting word for word what was happening. I remember in Stephen Furtick's Sun Stand Still book. And yeah, I know a lot of you guys are like, what, you read that book? Yes, I had an advanced copy even. So shocking. Fun news. He would pull paragraphs, pages, citing it, but never actually telling us that's where it was from. We all thought it was his own original ideas. He would pull personal stories. I remember he pulled an illustration from Francis Chan and pretended that it was him the whole time and acted as if it was him over and over and over and over and over again. The whole thing. And so I know this is not just a megachurch thing. It's not just an Ed Litton thing. It's not just my pastor's thing. And I imagine, had I known about what was going on then when I was a member of that church, and had I been, older than middle and high school when I was there, I'm sure I would have been met with some of the similar replies had I brought it up that Litton put forth, where, they said I could do it, so it was fine. So it's not really plagiarism if they gave me the ability to use their material, or maybe it's for the greater good. We're seeing people come to know the Lord because of this, therefore it's not wrong. I find all these excuses entirely unconvincing, and I'll touch on those later on in the video. But the main idea is that this is a common thing, and I don't think it's just megachurch pastors, as I said, because I've seen more recent examples. Others like, who else has plagiarized? Oh, Andreas Kostenberger. His commentary on John was pulled because he had plagiarized portions of D.A. Carson. Now, I don't know all the background on that. I feel like I remember there being excuses of like it was some sort of like writing assistant or something that didn't know, got the notes confused, something like that. Either way, it's plagiarism. Peter O'Brien had his Hebrews commentary pulled for plagiarism. And recently, there's been Peter Sammons over at the Masters University or College, whatever it is, I don't remember the name of it, where I've seen numerous occasions where he's been plagiarizing. He had an online lecture series with Masters that you had to pay for, and paragraphs, word for word, pulling from all sorts of different sources and not attributing them, not giving credit. And then you find out his dissertation turned book has the same sort of pulling sentences, word for word quotes from others and not citing them. And I think this is a serious, grievous thing that should not be ignored, that should not be covered. That's the most recent one. And so the excuses I saw for it fundamentally just circumvent. They're just running the same good old boy circuit. Every case that I've seen, Litton, Sammons, and others, it's the same. The crew that likes them protects them, and they say the same sort of excuses over and over. Well, sermons or lectures or whatever are not standard academic literature that requires the same citation. Now, that obviously ignores the case of if you're writing a book and you're plagiarizing. I think Driscoll and Kostenberger and these others who plagiarized that, the books have been pulled, but there's been excuses of like, well, I didn't know, or it was, so it was unintentional, or it was for the greater good, or whatever. We'll talk about some of those objections, I guess, here in a minute. I don't think any of them are convincing, because I think it's plagiarism is a serious sin. And I mention these names not because I want to be a watchdog, not because I want to unleash the underground, whoever on other people. That's not my goal here. So my goal is not for you to go find Andreas Kostenberger and beat down his door and say, you're a plagiarist, you need to give up doing whatever you're doing. Not my goal, not my intention. My intention is, though, to not be a coward and to not always speak in generalities. I think speaking in generalities is useful and for positive content more often than not. However, when you're talking about something serious like this, I do think it's important to bring the receipts to say it is a pervasive problem. Here are some examples. Here are some of the common objections to it, the reasons to say, well, it's not actually plagiarism. So with that said, I want to focus on the nature of plagiarism. What is it? Why is it so bad? And then I'll focus on some of these objections to the idea that it is plagiarism or that it is bad. So, University of Oxford, it defines plagiarism this way. It says plagiarism is presenting someone else's work or ideas as your own with or without their consent by incorporating it into your own work without full acknowledgement. So I think there's a couple of key pieces here that we need to keep in mind. Number one, plagiarism requires using someone else's work. Duh. That's obvious. But it's with or without their consent. So it doesn't matter. Consent is irrelevant to this. So I remember when the Ed Litton stuff came out, and I'm not trying to bash on Litton. That's an example. It's a real life example of what happened and how it was explained away. So it was explained as, well, he's gotten permission from J.D. Greer, therefore it's not plagiarism. Well, here we find this standard definition of plagiarism that says, no, consent is irrelevant. What matters is the lack of full acknowledgement. So if you don't acknowledge that this is not your own, not original to you, then it is plagiarism. And I think that is right on about what plagiarism is. And I don't think that's not context dependent to just the modern era. It's not as if the pre-modern era was cool with you lifting paragraphs or personal illustrations and pretending it's yours. I cannot imagine Augustine or Thomas Aquinas or anybody else saying, yep, that's cool to do that. I have no problem with you taking my material, publishing it as your own. No, that absolutely would not fly. No one would find that acceptable. So, why is plagiarism bad? Well, sometimes it is theft. If you don't have a person's consent, then it's definitely theft. If you're preaching or if you're teaching or if you're publishing something and it's not yours and you didn't get consent, definitely theft. That's not always the case, though, if you got consent. But it is always, everywhere, 100% of the time, dishonest. It is 100% dishonest. It is not telling the truth. And then there's a couple of things about it not telling the truth. So it may involve telling the truth in some sense, but with the intent to deceive. So while you may, while telling intentional falsehoods is obviously dishonest, maybe you specifically say exactly, this is my original work, and then you go on to quote something and it's not. That's intentionally being dishonest in more ways than one. But you could be telling truth with the intent of deception. So you could be lifting a quote from somebody else and pretending it's your own, but it's you're telling the truth in whatever it is, but it's deception. It could also be sort of like a selective deception, a selective telling of the truth. So you twist it just enough to where it's sort of kind of yours, but not really. And I know I could give some concrete examples, but I'm gonna skip forward because I think that probably makes sense to you. So I think this is just fundamentally. So I've got two Bible verses listed here I want to mention. Ephesians 4:25. It says, "Therefore, having put away falsehood, let each one of you speak the truth with his neighbor, for we are members of one another." I mean, that's just standard. You should tell the truth. That's why plagiarism is bad. If you pretend it's yours and it's not, then you're lying. Colossians 3, 9, 1-10 says, "Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of its creator." So, again, lying is clearly a sin. Plagiarism is lying, period. There is no ifs, ands, or buts after that. And we'll get to some of those objections where I can really nail it down a little bit more again in a minute. Why, though, before I get there, are people plagiarizing in such large quantities and amounts? I mean, you would think today's age, you have plagiarism check software. All people's videos and lectures are all over YouTube. Anybody can go watch them and fact check if they want. And there's also just the ability there's a proliferation of ability to access content and quickly check it. If you had two PDFs, you can check them side by side and look for the differences in a matter of 10 seconds, wherein, 30 years ago, you didn't have that option. So clearly it'd be easier to plagiarize then because you don't have people who would, number one, just even have the ability to quickly check it. So if there was someone who was really committed to just checking if you've plagiarized, it would take them hours to do it. Now, if someone wants to check, it can take them 10 seconds. You can just look. So why are people doing this? I mean, and I guess sermons too, transcriptions. You could just pull transcriptions down of them and then compare and contrast. I mean, that's easy. So why? Well, I think fundamentally there's probably just the pride factor. The pride factor of this person said it better and I want to sound really smart, or I want to sound competent in what I'm talking about. But there's also potentially a little bit of a shame and embarrassment factor that goes into wanting to plagiarize, where you want to seem esteemed in some way, and you know this other person's esteemed and you don't feel confident in the way you could say it. So you're going to pull somebody else's material in bits and pieces here and there and use them. So it gives you more credibility because you sound really intelligent. It sounds like you've done the work. Sounds like you know what you're talking about because clearly this other person does and they're respected. So you begin to garner respect. But what happens is as you get more respect and as you continue to do this, you begin tempted to do it more and more and more and more until you get caught. And as your credibility grows and grows and grows, you haven't done the homework yourself. And so you're more and more dependent upon others to do the work for you. I think there's another aspect of time that can often factor into plagiarism. And so you just don't have enough time to do everything that you want to do. You're in a crunch. Maybe it's a sermon and you feel like Saturday night, it's 11 o'clock and you're sitting there. I don't have a sermon done, so I'm just going to pull somebody else's sermon. And I'm too afraid to admit that this is someone else's sermon, so I'm going to pretend it's mine. So I can understand the time factor being a reason for people wanting to plagiarize. That doesn't make it a good excuse, because obviously all you could do is say, I'm going to use Charles Spurgeon's sermon tomorrow, and I'm going to walk up there and say, hey, somebody had an issue in the congregation, I was busy, or whatever it is. I'm going to use this sermon because it really ministered to me. And you go on and you present it as if it was you presenting it, but they all know it's not yours. Like, that's not hard. And really, that's what I guess I wanted to say. Just in no matter the context, plagiarism is not hard to avoid. It's not. Say, someone else said this. This is not mine. It's not difficult to do that. It is not at all. I understand there can be circumstances in more academic literature. Maybe you typed out a quote of somebody else that was really good and you forgot to put the page number or the source, and somehow it gets incorporated into your work and you think it's yours. Kind of understand that. Though, I mean, personal experience, I know when it's not mine. And if your citation practices of copying stuff is bad enough to not put page number or person or even just quotes around it to remind you that it's not yours, then you're just being negligent. But what are some other reasons? I think there's also the reason of credentialism. This funnels under pride, I think, a little bit, to where people they want to be the smartest. They feel like there is a need to prove themselves in some way. And so they feel like let's pull from the smart people and use it as mine. I mean, there's a lot of motivations, I guess. I think they all just kind of like boil down to pride, really, when I think about it. I don't see any other way you could really say people want to plagiarize. I mean, why else would you want to do it? Now, there's obviously disastrous consequences to plagiarism, right? Not only is it a personal sin against a holy God, it also has disastrous social consequences. Trust is built on that sort. Like, if you want to have trust with somebody, whether it's academic or whether it's a pastoral context, whatever, it's built on the ability to tell the truth. And if you erode that ability to tell the truth, and it seems like you've been doing that frequently over and over and over, not telling the truth, you will have lost your trust and your capability. No one will trust you if you don't tell the truth, even if it's in small matters. Frequent non-truth telling in those matters tells me I don't want to trust you in other matters. Why should I? If you are not willing to tell the truth in this instance, that's very easy to do it. I don't look down upon anyone who cites someone proper. Like, so what? You weren't original. Cool. Neither am I. None of us are truly original. We're all just drawing on a well of great giants. Why is it bad to stand up and say, this is who I've really been indebted to? That seems like a proper, humble, intellectually humble thing to do, and also just real and realistic. Like, there's no way we're all totally original. And now Augustine, so he has a treatise on lying, and he argues that even if we lie in order to gain believers to the truth, so like this would be an idea of plagiarism is okay because it's leading to good fruit or positive results for whatever that's for. He says that's wrong. We're still sinning, not merely because lying is an absolute moral law, but because those that hear us upon learning of our deceptive tactics will be unsure of its veracity. So he says this, quote, "How can there be any believing one who thinks it is sometimes right to lie, lest haply he lie at the moment when he teaches us to believe," end quote. So I think the idea here from Augustine is just that the more you lie, the less reliable you are, and therefore, when and where can I really trust you? If you've lied in all these other instances, why should I trust you here? So that for a Christian, that's catastrophic. If you're a pastor, that's catastrophic. If you are a teacher, an academic teacher of Christian doctrine, that is terrible. It's disqualifying, number one, but it's just going to ruin any ability to trust anybody. It's going to have disastrous consequences on all things related to what you're teaching, just the social credibility that you have. I don't see why it's hard to just be honest about that. So in this essay that I wrote at the London Lyceum, I put a couple of objections. I'm going to look at them and tell them. So I had objection 1, this utilitarian kingdom dishonesty is virtue. So the objection went like this: sermon plagiarism could lead someone to the faith. If it leads someone to faith, it's worth it. So I already mentioned how I think that's just fundamentally stupid. No. Situational dishonesty is virtue. So this objection goes like this: since some lies in Scripture are vindicated, Rahab, the Hebrew midwives, other lies that produce goods are vindicated as well. And here I would say that there's no situation for a pastor or an academic where they need to lie in order to achieve a greater good. All they have to do is cite their sources. And again, if you're teaching a lecture, if you are doing a sermon, I know people are like, well, it can mess up the flow. It can mess up the flow of the sermon. Okay, just say someone said and move on. That's not a very high bar. What you're doing is giving acknowledgement that this is not my own. That's also not a hard thing to do. That should be a Christian thing to do. Okay, move on. Permissive dishonesty as virtue. So the objection goes like this: since I have permission from the author, I'm not stealing. Therefore, it's not morally wrong. But again, we've already gone over this. Plagiarism, having permission doesn't matter. It's about pretending something is yours when it's not. And again, it's not hard to just say it's not yours. Okay. Variation in form. I had this as objection 4. So the objection went like this: sermons are relevantly dissimilar to other sorts of communication that prohibit plagiarism. Therefore, there's an assumption that sermon material is borrowed, which means citation is not necessary. Okay, I think I saw the same thing with the lectures from Peter Sammons as I did from the preaching of Ed Litton, where it's a lecture, therefore the standards of plagiarism and citation are out the window. But plagiarism is fundamentally dishonesty. If you say things in a way, if you present it in a way that it sounds like it's yours when it's not, that is lying. That is plagiarism. And if you find it all the more in an academic book, you should lose your job. Now, that's not my responsibility to go out there and police everybody in those situations. But my opinion is, if you're plagiarizing on a regular basis, that is disqualifying of an academic. That's disqualifying of a pastor. That's disqualifying of anybody in any position who's doing that on a regular basis. I can understand mistakes. I cannot understand habitual, continual plagiarism, and then it's ignored, or it's pretended that it's no big deal, or it's pretended that it's just, yeah, I don't know. I don't know what to say. Plagiarism's wrong. Plagiarism's not hard to avoid. It's easy. You say, this is not mine, this is from this person. That's just standard intellectual humility, and that's standard just practice of acknowledging who you're indebted to. It's not difficult. It's really not. What is my other objections here? Oh, the pre-modern dishonesty thing. Yeah, so I think I already mentioned this, where the pre-moderns didn't have an idea of intellectual property, so they wouldn't have thought plagiarism's bad. I don't think that's true. Maybe they didn't have the worked out version of intellectual property that we have today, but they still, like I mentioned earlier, they would have recognized that this is not this person's, and therefore it's wrong. So what's the last objection here? Truisms and citations. The objection goes like this. Everyone agrees that we don't need to cite truisms. We don't cite someone when we say I before E except after C, and therefore we don't have to do it in these situations. Well, again, the examples that I've given and of the people who've plagiarized, it wasn't just truisms. They're plagiarizing other people's original work. And so it's definitely wrong. Okay, I'm going to pause here for a second. So if you guys see a weird clip in this section, it's because my 2-year-old's out of his bed trying to wake up his brother. So I'll be back. All right, I'm back. If I look distracted there for the last, minute, that's because I was. I've got my monitor here for my kids because I record these videos typically pretty late at night because I have a normal job and responsibilities, and I don't want to take away time from my kids and my family. So I just do these when I'm feeling a burst of energy in the evening. So sorry for that. Now, what was I saying? I lost my total train of thought. Plagiarism's bad. Plagiarism's wrong. There's no good excuse for it. Maybe some advice for whether you're a pastor or you're a teacher or an academic of some sorts. Cite your sources. Be honest. Fundamentally, you should just have a commitment to honesty, and honesty at all costs. I would rather you be overly cautious than slip into this desire to pretend that you're great or to promote a sort of narrative that you're great. Like, it really is fundamentally just a matter of honesty. It's a matter of respect for others, treating them fairly. It's a matter of, social trust for those people that you work with and that you serve and that you teach. But really, it's fundamentally just a matter of honesty. Do you want to stand before the Lord at the end and say, look, yeah, I ripped off other people not because I just didn't have whatever it is, but because fundamentally I wanted to be liked, I wanted to sound smart, I wanted to sound intelligent. If you're tempted to plagiarize, it's very easy to not do it. Now, I don't know all the inner workings of the sin, the temptation that leads it. I mean, obviously I know what James tells us about that. I don't know how difficult it is for each of you to worry about plagiarism. For me, it seems like it's a no-brainer. Like, that's just an absolute open and shut case no. And if you're doing it, that's very, very concerning because it's such a low bar of a thing. So, obviously this is wrong and obviously you can avoid it. That if you're not, it gives me a lot of concern. And if you're habitually doing it again, I think that is a sin worthy of discipline, period. End of discussion. I don't think that's up for debate. Constant habitual lying of a public sort like that is very serious. And I don't know why people think it's not. I will probably get blasted for this. People will probably be mad because I put names in here, whatever. My intention, again, is not to be the watchdog. It's not to be, what do they call them, discernment, blogger, YouTuber, whatever. That's not my goal here. My goal is to, number one, bring to attention the pervasive nature of plagiarism so that we can, number one, be aware of it. And number two, if you're watching this and you're committing it, you can be convicted and you can repent. Number three, you can be more aware to protect others and to teach others not to do it as well. To remind them, look, no, this is wrong. This is a sin. This is a serious problem that needs to be stamped out. We Christians should not have any hint of such intellectual pride to plagiarize in any sense, in any form. Okay, I'm done talking about this topic. I don't want to bring it up again. I just felt really compelled to talk about plagiarism because it seems to be so pervasive and no one else is really talking about it. No one's addressing it head on. And I don't know why that is. I think when I talk about it with other people, it seems like common sense. They agree. But there's not this moral, fervor that for whatever reason I feel like I have when it comes to plagiarism. And maybe that's just me, that I have this extreme moral passion for this topic. I don't know. I think it's deadly serious. It has incredibly bad consequences. And it's fundamentally just dishonest. And I think we need to kill it. No more plagiarism. Let's stop it. If you've plagiarized, you should, and you have a position of authority that is related to what you've been plagiarizing, you should find another job. I don't know how else to put it. It's wrong. There is forgiveness under the cross. Praise God. We've all done bad things. I'm sure all of us have cheated on a test somewhere, which probably in some ways is a form of plagiarism. And so we've all sinned and we've all fallen short. Absolutely. No one's perfect. However, again, habitual, regular plagiarism of some sort of extensive sort, to me, is discipline worthy. Like if you're a pastor and you are copying other people's personal illustrations as your own, to me, that's like a serious threshold crossed. It's one thing to pull somebody else's outline and not tell anybody. It's one thing to pull their sermon title. It's another thing to take their personal illustration and pretend it's yours. In academic context, it's one thing to pull a sentence here and there, a phrasing that somebody else has used. It's one thing to forget about somebody's source. I mean, how many times have I forgotten that I pulled something from somewhere and forgot to say it? Like, that's possible. I get it. Paragraph long quotes without citation, that's a line that's crossed. Doing it regularly and consistently, again, massive line crossed. That's unacceptable. There is no scenario in which it is acceptable. Okay, I'm done talking about this. I'm serious this time. So if you've been watching, a couple of things. Number one, if you like the shirt, the Kiffin one, the Anabaptist one, drop me a comment. Tell me if you like it. If you want it in a different, I put the shirt on the website. No one picked it. So they picked a bunch of people like the mugs. So I just left the mugs up there. Somebody asked for stickers. I made stickers and I got rid of them. If you actually want something else, tell me and I'll put it up there because we use a third-party thing. So it's print on demand. So we don't make any money off this stuff, but it's still cool and fun to do. But that's what happens when you print on demand. I made all those We Distinguish mugs and things, and I tried to order them in bulk to see if that could help fund some of the different things we want to do with the London Lyceum. And now I have like 50 hoodies sitting in my garage. Massive mistake. Learn my lesson. Print on demand, that's the way. So that's one thing. Number two, if you agree with my plagiarism stuff, let me know. I've seen a ton of people online over the last 2+ years say that sermons and lectures, for whatever reason, they don't qualify for the plagiarism stuff. You can be dishonest, you can lie, and it's okay because it's a lecture or it's a sermon. That's insane. That is moral insanity. And I would say moral insanity about a lot of things. Obviously, it's moral insanity to promote killing the unborn child. It's moral insanity to have all of the LGBTQ stuff that goes on. I don't want to get into all this stuff. It's moral insanity. All these things, we're finding all sorts of moral insanity, but it's moral insanity for Christians, recognized Christians, like to think that you can just lie and it's okay. I don't get that. So. But drop your comments if you disagree with me. I'd love to hear your comments. Maybe I'm wrong and you think I'm wrong and you got a good reason. Tell me. I'd love to hear it. If you think I'm right, drop a comment too. I'd appreciate hearing what you think. If I've convinced you of one way or another, that'd be fun too. Anyway, this is Kiffin's Keep. I plan to have some more positive stuff coming up forward. I tried not to do a lot of these like more pointed, directed ones just because I like to create constructive, positive content, which even in this one, I've tried to stay constructive and positive. What is plagiarism? Why is plagiarism a bad thing? Trying to give those sort of big picture content ideas put together. Yeah, so there's a lot more that could probably be said about plagiarism, but we're done here. So thanks for tuning in to Kiffin's Keep. We'll look forward to thinking with you soon. I almost said the London Lyceum line, and I don't want to do that. So I'll talk to you guys soon.